It's Sunday, January 26th, 2020 at 10:45 a.m. and this is episode 1 of the Daily Aztec podcast, or Da Pod. Welcome to the first issue of the Daily Aztec's new podcast. I'm Assistant News Editor Michael Cline.
I am the live show editor, Jack Molmud.
And we're here recording live in the basement of Education and Business Administration on the campus of San Diego State University.
I feel like this is something new that we're trying out. I mean, we kind of just did this on a whim, threw together some of our recording devices and just figured, why not? Let's put on a podcast. Some editors from Daily Aztec past have tried to make this happen, but hopefully we will try to get this going pretty consistently. There is a lot of news to talk about. This is a huge year for news, for politics, especially here at San Diego State, given what we're going to talk about today. It sounds like we're up for a pretty good show.
Yeah, today we're going to be discussing Aztec men's basketball and their 20-0 start, a historic start for them. And we're also going to preview some spring sports with our assistant sports editor, Kyle Betz. But first, we discuss the news of the week. Here to discuss that news is Bella Ross. Bella Ross is the editor-in-chief of the Daily Aztec, previously working as the news editor and a senior staff writer. Her bylines appear in the San Diego Union Tribune, Los Angeles Times, iNewsSource, and KPBS, among others. Bella joins us now.
Well, hello. It's been kind of a crazy week on campus. I mean, we just got back. The first day back for the spring semester was Wednesday, and we've already had a couple breaking news stories, mostly relating to fraternity stuff. What's new?
It's been quite a busy week in general, I think, for all of us. Given
too.
The news we have to work with, combined with having the classes of us being in kind of our upper division parts of our majors, and then basketball has the best record, probably in the past 10 years, probably one of the best teams we have seen. But like Michael said, we'll get into that soon.
Frats keep us busy. We got to start with the frats.
Yeah, this next issue will be quite coincidentally a fraternity issue. I feel like, given what we're going to work with.
Up, guys.
Yeah,
we couldn't if we tried.
Yeah, we just read about it. Don't shoot the messenger.
Well, the university just dropped some news on Friday. They decided to release 3 of those new policies that are going to affect fraternities. So that, I think, was, I don't know if we know all the details about what the task forces are going to release in the future, but we have a sense of where they're going as far as trying to prioritize student safety, trying to ensure that whether you're a fraternity or another RSO, recognized student organization on campus, that student safety and transparency are kind of those main issues. Bella, do you have any thoughts about those 3 policies that they released on Friday?
Yeah, so just to be clear, these were task forces that were formed by President Adela de la Torre in the fall after the death of an SCSU freshman, Dylan Hernandez. And he was a pledge for a fraternity here on campus. It was PG, correct?
Correct.
And so he was pledging that fraternity, and he ended up passing away that night after falling off of his bunk bed. So they created these task forces, and this is the first opinion that they've put forth since they were thrown together in November. First of many, from what it sounds like, and I find them pretty interesting. The one that caught my attention was the Good Samaritan policy.
I like that name.
Yeah, definitely an interesting name. So basically, just to read what was in the email, it says the Good Samaritan policy strives to make clear the responsibility of students in the event of an emergency, encourage students to take appropriate action, and ensure that organizations that do take appropriate action are supported and not met with formal disciplinary sanctions for reporting the issue or incident. Which, I don't know, what are your thoughts, Michael?
Well, again, I think that's the main issue there would be student safety, student health above all else. I don't know if there's no way to document how many instances of intoxication or perhaps, alcohol poisoning, just throwing those out there as a couple different examples. How many times that's happened at an event hosted by a recognized student organization on campus where they've freaked out and they don't want to report that, or they have to take some emergency measures, or they don't call 911, or they don't get an ambulance to come to the scene because they're worried about the repercussions, or worried about losing their recognized status,
right.
Or there's those other issues. So I think that's based on the events of last semester. to have a policy in place that makes it clear that if you're an officer, if you're a treasurer or president of an organization, and you see somebody who needs help, you don't have to even consider any future repercussions or consequences for the organization you're a part of. You need to look out for that human. You need to treat them as a person, not like even a club member or a guest. You're treating them as a human and trying to look out for them.
And like I know, like we're like reporters, but we're all students here. Like I have many friends who have told me that they've been at frat parties and they've seen people who were so drunk that they definitely need to go to the hospital, but then they're hearing conversations happening on the side, such as, well, I don't want to call an ambulance because we're going to get suspended, because that's something that a lot of the source of a lot of campus Greek life suspensions is because there was a hospitalization that occurred because of one of their events. So I think that this is good in the sense that obviously student safety is first, but I am a little bit concerned about the lack of accountability that could happen. Obviously student safety does take priority, but the fact that people could be getting hospitalized at an event frequently from like the same organization and have that organization not see any repercussions because of that is definitely questionable.
Yeah, and to be clear too, the policy isn't really black and white, and I don't think you can ever make a black and white policy with regards to RSOs and their future conduct penalties. To be clear, the policy is intended to remove certain conduct penalties that would be associated with an alcohol violation or drug violation should a student who is intoxicated or does need medical assistance immediately, that the RSO does take those measures to ensure that they are taken care of, that they seek the medical attention that they need. But they say certain conduct penalties. They don't really state clearly how an organization could go about proving that they took the right steps. So I think that those are questions that still remain from the policy. But if there's any other thoughts, Jack, I think you might have some.
Yeah, I feel like this Good Samaritan policy is not like a groundbreakingly new initiative that they're taking. If I'm being honest, it's definitely like when you are rushing a fraternity, when you are in Greek life, they encourage you to come forward and step forward if you see hazing, if you see people being discriminated against, so on and so forth. And they definitely do promote that. And doing so in this email is just reaffirming that it's okay to come forward. I actually just took an RSO training for the Society of Professional Journalists here. And there was also a lot of cultural and academic fraternity presidents and treasurers there. The presenter had a hotline email to be able to anonymously tip any hazing or anything that's going on. So I feel like this isn't much of anything new, and I feel like still, like you were saying, Michael, like the repercussions or like the methodology to which somebody is reporting this is still in question, and the fear of being 18 or 19 years old and reporting that this organization that took me in is in the wrong and they're doing something wrong, the fear is still there, and it doesn't dissipate any further with what they presented here. Yeah,
I think that the policy was put in place to perhaps eliminate any confusion about what's important right now. Mm-hmm. Is my RSO important? Do I have to look out for any the 99% of other members who are doing okay, or that 1% that needs medical attention? And this policy is meant to eliminate that nuance surrounding student health, to say that that's the priority number one. We'll sort the conduct policies. We'll sort any responsibilities or repercussions that come from this afterwards, but you need to prioritize their health first and foremost. So again, like I said, I don't know if you can really eliminate the gray area there with the policy. I'm sure there's always going to be a circumstance, or you could always pose a hypothetical that would create discussion or differing opinions, but I think the intent from the university is to say student health is the priority first and foremost, and no other consideration should be made in that moment.
Well, they had to put that out there. I mean, the task forces were just announced last semester, and they have been meeting, and now they finally put out something related to what they have been meeting for. I feel like something beyond just this Good Samaritan policy, something that was a burning question for a lot of us, was this is a new semester, and there is always recruitment happening every single semester. And I feel like we finally came to some sort of an answer of what is going to happen. Maybe we could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, so that Good Samaritan policy was only one part of three parts, I believe, of this email that was sent out on Friday to everybody on campus. Another big thing, it answered the question that everybody had about what was going to be happening with recruitment this semester. All the Greek life organizations do rush in the fall and in the spring, but obviously all of the IFC related fraternities were on suspension last semester. And it seems like they reviewed some of these chapters, and only some of them aren't going to be allowed to rush. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, five in total are prevented from recruiting, prevented from participating in the spring rush. But the way that they worded that in the email and on the website was not that they had lifted suspensions, it's that they were keeping 5 suspensions in place. So the IFC, or the way that IFC fraternities are now operating, we know that there were 3 of the 14 before the death of the SDSU freshman Dylan Hernandez that seemingly hadn't done anything wrong. They weren't under investigation. The university hadn't been investigating any alleged misconduct. So those seem to be, they were kind of grouped in with the rest of the IFC when they threw the blanket suspension around them and unrecognized all of them. Now it seems like things are a little bit normalizing, but again, you have those 5 chapters that are that remain suspended, that remain kind of under the spotlight, so to speak.
Right, and there do seem to be some unprecedented new rules placed on the fraternities that are still allowed to operate and do spring recruitment. They said that all of the events for those fraternities, the ones other than the 5 that are still suspended, have to take place between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m., and that there have to be either a faculty or staff member or alumnus present during the event. So I think that will definitely dissuade some of the drinking that we see probably happening at these events.
And they're going to keep those events as close to the university as possible, so there's no satellite events that can take place with new members. Even an event that was a training or just like an initiation type procedure, that cannot happen at a satellite house. And I think that that's the university trying to bring everyone as close back to the core of campus as possible.
Yeah, I feel like even though this is like the first word we are getting of what's changing, and we finally have answers to what's going to happen with recruitment, and now we have 5 IFC-related fraternities that cannot take part in any of these new kind of parameters that have been set up. I still feel like that in recent fraternity history at SDSU, this is the most defined parameters set up by the university that we've seen that kind of limit, like the time limit to have social events. This isn't a social moratorium. This isn't an interim suspension. We don't really know what to call it. I've reached out to the PIOs here at the university as to what to call it, and they don't really have an answer for that either, from what I've heard. But yeah, it's just really telling of what's going to happen, and I feel it's really good that the school put that out there. But something I kind of feel like we should also touch base on is the news that we got even before school started, which was that Union Tribune investigation into the family of Dylan Hernandez and what the school presented to them in terms of their findings of their internal investigation. And going forward from that, I feel like there's a lot to unpackage there.
Yeah, Bella, do you have any thoughts on what the UT uncovered, what the UT dropped on that Sunday right before school started?
Definitely. So that was very interesting. They had basically gotten access to a report of the campus police's investigation into the incident through Hernandez's family's lawyer. And it kind of showed them that it seems like most of the investigation was conducted in the 3 weeks immediately following his death. And from what it looks like, they didn't really investigate the fraternities at all. And of course, the investigation hasn't been completed. A preliminary form of the report was given to the UT, so it's a little bit hard to say exactly what's going to be present and what kind of investigation was done, throughout the entirety of the report. But it doesn't look like they requested any phone records or reviewed social media accounts. There's not even any evidence that they entered the fraternity house where Dylan Hernandez was alleged to have been on the night that he died. So that's all very interesting. I mean, those seem like very obvious things to be looking into if you're investigating something that happened at a fraternity.
They said that the bulk of the investigation was done back in November. And it seems like they're kind of just waiting on more leads, or we don't really know what they're waiting on to finish up this investigation, which kind of makes you wonder why the UPD and why the school handed the family their findings so far. Did they request them? And then the fact that the family had to go through one channel, through one media source to kind of state their claim, to say, hey, we don't feel like that this is fair. We don't feel like our son, who we just sent off to college, is getting the justice that he may deserve. I feel like that's obviously really telling of what's going to happen next. And now we finally know a few other things, like Dylan's blood alcohol content was estimated at the time that he came home from the party at about midnight. His blood alcohol content was 3 times that of the legal limit of 0.08. And then at 10:45 the next morning, it went down to 0.06, which we see now in the medical examiner's report that he also had THC in his system too. So that just opens up the whole another door of what was going on that night at Fiji. The Union Tribune, I think, reported that it was a big little reveal for the fraternity. So it was definitely a fraternity event where he went, where he drank and smoked.
And it's really interesting because the UT's report came out with some messages that they saw that were sent between fraternity members around that night. And some of them include, one message was, we should wipe the chats, kind of implying that, there were things that happened this night that we do not want the police to see. And another one was, remember what silence is. There was some people messages saying stuff like silence is golden. And that really just kind of reaffirmed some of the things that we've been hearing about fraternities, that there is a big culture of silence and, not being transparent about the things that happen between the doors, even when it involves something extremely serious that eventually resulted in the death of a student. It seems like silence is the priority, and maintaining the status of the fraternity is the priority here.
Well, yeah, and what we've seen so far with the changes in policies, what we've seen so far with the university police giving a preliminary report to the family, is there's a bid to increase transparency. Again, there are still burning questions that remain, and transparency can mean 2 different things to 2 completely different people. Right. So expecting that from the university, or the expectations with transparency moving forward, is going to be something that's really interesting to follow. It'll
be definitely a test of how we hold this institution accountable. I mean, when you have people that want to stay silent, that want to wipe the chats, quote, silence is golden. It's really interesting to see how we hold these different people accountable. And like you said, Michael, it just raises even more questions. What role will the self-governed IFC have going forward? We've tried to reach out to the president, Stephen Plant, multiple times. Haven't heard too much, so we don't really know what's going to happen. I've reached out to the PIOs at the school to find out if he is not commenting because he has no role, or he's just choosing not to comment. I feel like that's something we'll find out soon enough also.
Yeah, and to kind of touch more on the transparency issue, it does seem like the school is trying to address this, which is, a relief to us as journalists. We put in a lot of work for these fraternity stories that come out. There normally isn't an announcement when a fraternity is suspended. In the past, it happens all the time, but we don't hear about it unless we get some kind of tip, and then we follow up with the university, and then they'll give us a little bit of information, but we're never able to know the full story. But in the email that came out that mentioned the Good Samaritan policy and some follow-ups on the recruitment for the spring, it also mentioned a new move by Student Life and Leadership, where they're going to be creating a webpage where they'll be posting all of this information about the fraternities, including their status, so whether they're suspended, interim suspension, removed from campus, whether they're active, and any information detailing an overview of allegations or findings or sanctions or anything along those lines. So it does seem like there is going to be a little bit more transparency on this issue than we've seen in the past, which is, I think, a good thing. And it really allows us to follow these chapters and understand what they're doing.
I feel like so far this is definitely a great move for transparency on the school's part. Despite the questions that we still have, we're just entering the 2nd week of the spring 2020 semester. So there's still much more to be seen there. But yeah, I feel like now we've dwelled a lot on the moves for so far this semester with the IFC, with the fraternity suspensions, with the investigations. That we move on to a certain other subject that the Daily Aztec is working on, which will be launching, hopefully by the time you hear this. Michael?
Yeah, 2020, big year for politics, presidential politics. A primary coming up on March 3rd, 2020 for the state of California, Super Tuesday. the Daily Aztec is currently working on releasing a student-wide poll of the SDSU population to gauge which candidate has the upper hand among college students, specifically college students at this campus. We're also going to be asking them a number of questions about SDSU issues. So with the race heating up, the primary season heating up, Bella, do you have any thoughts on the presidential race thus far? Who's up, who's down? Who do you think is going to be a contender among SDSU students?
Wow. I mean, I feel like even though, the pool of Democratic candidates is really dwindled down, I do feel like there is still so many players, because even if a candidate isn't really playing well here with SDSU students, they're playing well somewhere else in the country because there's just so many different feelings about everything that's going on. But I feel like San Diego State, just to begin, I do feel like there's a lot more conservatives on campus than people want to believe. I do think that there's a culture of kind of shame around conservatism at SDSU just because it's so far out of the norm. You don't see protests about those kinds of things happening. You just like with the kind of organizations and stuff that are on campus, the culture isn't very welcoming to conservatives, I don't think, and we've seen that in the past. And I feel like the poll will show that. And just to kind of talk about the Democratic candidates, I do feel like there is a big Sanders backing on campus just because, we're young people.
He's got the policies for that.
Yeah, we're young people. We're all here. Free college, all of that stuff really does strike a note with the students on campus. And I do see a lot of that. I don't think the candidates such as, Pete Buttigieg are going to be doing as well.
Not at all. Pete Buttigieg is trying to be, just to not kind of generalize, but he is trying to appeal to he is from the Midwest. He is definitely going after those lower populated Midwest states that will in the long term still get him an equal amount of votes due to electoral college. But also what you said about the conservative population on campus. Our poll is designated to get the climate of pretty much every student no matter the political ideology. It's going to be really interesting to see how these different facets of political ideologies want to vote, or even if they do want to vote, or what they feel like, what direction is going. We just saw a rebranding of college Republicans. I forgot what they're self-labeled on their Twitter. I
don't know, but they lost the elephant. That's all I'm going to say. The elephant is too boomer for them.
They've got this vaporwave, 80s
They went
revival.
total internet political meme. And I'm here for it. I find them fairly entertaining.
After 2016, I think it's obvious why they would go that route, because there are people that argue that memes got Trump elected and brought Trump to the White House. So their rebrand is definitely geared towards that versus the, like you said, Bella, the boomer Republican type type ideas. But yeah, I just with the poll, because we're going to be asking not just preferences on candidates or Trump's approval, disapproval on campus, which is going to yield a lot of really interesting results. I am curious to see how many people on campus do think that Trump's doing a good job. We're also going to be asking them about the issues that matter most to them, not just with SDSU, but with the country in general. So it'll be really interesting to see if Bernie supporters are really driven by student loans. Are they really driven by these issues of student loan debt and college affordability? Are other candidates driven by issues that are not really related to life as a student, but more so like the future or other issues that could be present in their own personal life? Bella, do you have some thoughts on that?
I think that I'm kind of curious. I'm kind of curious what candidates that people are going to be supporting other than Sanders. It's kind of hard to tell what issues people feel passionately about on campus because we see so much passion behind everything. There was the climate strike that happened last semester. That was one of the biggest, I think that was the biggest protest I've personally seen on campus since the protest following Trump's election in 2016. I've been involved in news here for a long time, and that was, I think, the biggest one I had seen.
I think the climate protest was just under 400 people, if I remember correctly.
It was pretty
we were there
impressive.
live streaming it, marched throughout it. The school gave them an open forum, too. I thought that was kind of funny that they set up a podium for them and everything, even though it was supposed to be kind of like a strike.
Because you're supposed to be walking out of class. I know that did happen. I know that there were a lot of professors on campus who told their students straight out, hey, if you want to walk out of class, do your thing. You can do that. I don't really care. But I think that could be a big issue for students. But really, I see people come out for a lot of things. I know that social justice is a big thing amongst college students around here, especially. We see a lot of student organizations targeted on those kinds of things. So I think social issues, definitely environmental issues. A lot of those key liberal issues I do think are pulling students more towards that kind of thing. And then things obviously, like you said, that just strike acute with students no matter what, like student loans, all of those kinds of things. And then also being so close to the border, I think that immigration issues will also be in the highlight among students.
Again, if that is a chief concern among students, it'll be really interesting to track which candidates do they support, because one of our questions will feature the option or the ability to choose multiple candidates. So we can kind of see which group of candidates appeal to one voter versus the other, and obviously asking their first preference, but to see if there is a trend among certain supporters that are linked or feel passionate about certain issues. It'll be really interesting to track that and dive through the data.
So I'm wondering, Michael, what candidates do you think could be really successful students, other than, I mentioned Sanders, but maybe even Warren, but what do you think?
Yeah, it's fascinating because we've seen a trend with Warren, just like a lot of different candidates who have surged and then fallen in recent days. Warren has definitely seen a fall nationally over the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks. We saw Buttigieg really surge at the beginning of the campaign. He was, super popular, making a ton of different media appearances. He was at one point number 1 in Iowa. He was leading the Iowa polls.
He was quite banking on Iowa too to get his trajectory going.
Absolutely, and that's a strategy we see with a lot of different campaigns where you don't have a huge national profile like Biden or Sanders do. So Buttigieg, knowing what he's familiar with, Midwest issues, small city issues of trade and the economy, going into Iowa, if you can get enough momentum to start and you win Iowa, you can carry that momentum to the different states. So I don't see a candidate, again, that strategy hasn't really worked for him. He's falling down. I do think Sanders is going to be really popular. I think Andrew Yang's going to be popular. I've seen the math hats. I don't know about you. It's really early in the semester, but I've seen the math hats around. I think Yang's going to be probably within the top 3 or 4 I'm
calling Yang at number 3.
So you sent me a poll, Michael. You sent this to Jack and I, and this was a Washington Post, ABC News national poll from yesterday, and it shows Buttigieg is down to 5% now, under Yang. Yang's at 7% nationally. That's kind of nuts, especially, because you mentioned he started out really good, and then also, I mentioned, I was at the Women's March last week doing some reporting, and there were Buttigieg supporters everywhere.
God.
Yeah. They were all over the place. And, they well outnumbered. I didn't really see any Sanders supporters. There were, a handful of signs, but definitely not what I expected. I saw, a little bit more Warren, but nothing like the number of Pete Buttigieg supporters I saw at the Women's March. I don't know. I think that they're probably just better organized than everybody else, but I'm surprised to see him polling so low because it does seem in other locations like he's on the come up.
Yeah, and that poll that you're citing there, the ABC News Washington Post national poll, no Klobuchar. Klobuchar's been on the debate stage since the first debate. She's not there. We do see Bloomberg at 8%, and I don't really think Bloomberg is going to appeal to the Southern California college student. No. I don't see him anywhere near the top, but he and Tom Steyer have been doing very well. They've been doing a lot of media appearances, and I think comparatively well for two people who joined the race very late in the going. They seem to be registering, but I also don't really look at that as being as influential as someone like Andrew Yang, who is building a base from nothing. Sanders already had the base in place. He's doing the same strategy where Sanders started off very, very small. He just wanted to have a policy discussion. And then, of course, Hillary was going to get the nomination. He just wanted to bring those issues to the debate stage, and it turned into a huge movement that he's now banking on and trying to use as a tidal wave to the nomination. I think Yang is kind of doing a similar thing there just as much. And again, the hats, we saw the hats in 16. The hats are just as popular with him with the math branding. So, Jack, you have some thoughts on Yang or Bloomberg or the presidential nomination in general?
I think just in total, with the school's political climate, I feel like you touched on it a little bit, Michael, with the Sanders supporters. A lot of our older students, kind of juniors, seniors, graduate students, kind of had their first taste of national politics with the 2016 election. I know Sanders definitely fired up a lot of that base. And I still feel like we are going to see Sanders, obviously, I 100% believe will be at number 1 of this poll that we're polling students on. Also, due to the part that I feel as though young voters may still feel a little bit of resentment over Sanders. Maybe they feel he didn't get enough traction as they thought, or enough grassroots movement coming to fruition in the 2016 election. So they definitely still feel fired up over that. 2016 does not feel that long ago at all. I feel both him and Andrew Yang, like Michael said, do kind of have that grassroots feel. Andrew Yang is talking about things that no other candidate is really talking about in terms of automation of jobs, stuff like he's talking about the same stuff that Trump talked about in 2016 to get elected in terms of jobs. Trump was saying, like, I'm going to bring jobs back. I'm going to bring your job back to the Midwest. But now Andrew Yang is talking about truck drivers' jobs being automated away by self-driving cars. I feel like he's well ahead of his time in that, and I feel like a lot of young voters are resonating off of that. He also has the online support that is getting him the money and the donation that he needs. I feel my hot take is that Andrew Yang and also Tulsi Gabbard, a really strong online candidate, they're going to be polling very high in our poll.
You think so?
I 100% think so. I could order it right now. I feel like it's going to go Sanders, Warren, probably. I'm just going to say Yang at number 3, then probably Gabbard, then Biden.
So
whatever.
I want to talk about Biden. I feel like, okay, he's obviously polling at number 1, and I mean, I think we can all agree that a lot of that is, you know, name recognition. People associate him with Obama, you know, older Americans.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, do you think that, you know, the support of young people who is largely backing candidates like Warren and Sanders can take him out of that seat?
I saw my first Biden supporter. I saw my first public sighting of a Biden supporter at a women's march. The women's march that we were at.
See, I don't see people, like, they're not the people with signs. They're the normal people who aren't super interested in politics, I think, largely. They're not, like, because, I mean, all the other candidates have these passionate bases, but I don't think they're appealing as much to the average American.
It's
like
the
Biden
safe
is.
vote.
Yeah, it's a safe vote.
They associate Biden with Obama. But I feel like a lot of, like, new voters are fired up to vote, to use the power of civic engagement and use it in such a way that they want to back a candidate who is a little bit more fired up, who wants to shake the boat a little bit. And I feel like we've seen that for years. I mean, we saw that in 2016. We're seeing that now.
So do you think a candidate like Biden, who I think comparatively we can all agree he's a little bit lukewarm, if we're looking at him versus somebody like Sanders, do you think that he can garner enough excitement to beat Donald Trump? Because I personally don't think he can.
I have various hot takes in terms of how the general election will play out.
Let's hear him.
I mean, you've heard the line repeated throughout history that the incumbent always wins or has a great chance of winning. I personally, keep in mind this isn't how I personally feel. This is just how I forecast it going. Is that we have 2 billionaires that we know of in the race. And I feel like they are both rising the fastest compared to most other people on the national stage. I feel like Donald Trump's debate policy is rigid, brash, and I don't think Biden would be able to hang in a debate with Trump. I do feel like he does have that support, but I also feel like there are people out there who will hate Biden just as much as people unfairly hated
Hillary
Clinton back in 2016. They will treat him the same way compared to Trump. And I feel like, honestly, 100%, I feel like people would back like a Democrat billionaire candidate against Donald Trump. Like if Bloomberg was on the stage against Trump, you have 2 of New York's biggest from the early 2000s up there. I feel like that is a good matchup. Do I support Bloomberg? No. But I'm saying that would be a good head-to-head competition.
I think a really key consideration is that Hillary did gain 3 million more votes than Donald Trump did in the 2016 election.
That's
But
true.
one person's president, one person isn't. We know who that is. The real issue is, can you drive voter engagement? Can you drive turnout in the states where it really matters the most? We saw that among a number of different issues with the way that the Hillary Clinton for president campaign was run, that she spent more money on ads in Omaha, Nebraska than she did in a number of swing states where she lost, where the numbers said she was going to win by 5% in Michigan. That didn't end up happening. The numbers said that she was going to win, the data, the analytics. We're going to win in Ohio. We're going to win in Iowa. We're going to win in Pennsylvania. And none of, that didn't really turn out. So we see candidates that don't really connect with voters in places like Flint, Michigan and Cleveland, Ohio, those are the areas where you're going to need to drive out support. You're going to need to go into cities in the Midwest, in Des Moines, in Springfield, Illinois, and make your case to those voters.
So the strategy just wasn't there. I mean, at least last time.
And maybe not even the message either.
Yeah.
I think there were a lot of people who said, I don't really like Trump's rhetoric, but he gets me, or he understands me, or I could grab a beer with him and he would be able to understand my economic struggles. Mm-hmm. So there's got to be a candidate who can craft a message and spend the money and the time necessary to go into those states. Hillary Clinton did make an appearance in Wisconsin, for example, in the run-up to the 2016 election. She ended up losing that state. You have to be present. You have to have a campaign message that connects with those people. And I think that's really a core consideration. It's not necessarily, who's got the most support within the party. It's like who can take the message of the party and bring it to those areas.
Exactly.
100%. I feel like a candidate like Joe Biden, like Bernie Sanders. I mean, they just and Hillary Clinton is evident of that. They carry so much baggage with voters who are kind of either aren't really too involved with politics. They just hear what they hear from CNN or MSNBC or Fox. And they kind of just carry that with them to the voting booth. And I feel like you definitely need, in order to beat the incumbent, you need to be just as fiery as he is. And people back in 2016 saw that. And like I was saying earlier, younger people want a candidate that brings that to the table. And there was also a lot of young Republican support for Donald Trump too, insane amount of support. And they're still there to this day. They're just getting older, and there's more of them.
So I think this is probably, our last question on the poll. But I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think, which candidate do you think could beat Donald Trump? Because that's the big question in everybody's head right
Sanders.
now. You think Sanders?
100%, yeah. So if you look at the numbers of individual contributions to campaigns, Sanders blows everybody else out of the water. I don't know if the message, the Sanders policies connect with everybody, but when you get a working family, when you get a single mother, when you get a retiree to donate $27 to a campaign, his campaign with 5 million individual contributions so far in the election cycle, breaking a national record, a historic record, that's what drives people to go to the polls, right? I think that's the biggest thing. Can you drive turnout? Can you turn out the base? Can you turn out people to vote for a message, to vote for a candidate, not vote against somebody like Donald Trump? That's not going to be enough. We saw that in 2016. It wasn't enough just to vote against Donald Trump. You had to have a message and drive people to the polls. Sanders getting 5 million people to donate anything they have in their checkbook. Those are the people who are going to go to the end of the earth to support him. So I think that Sanders would have the upper hand in any election because he's getting people who have no money, who have no disposable income to give to the campaign because they're buying the message, they're buying the candidate, they're buying the person.
And I think it's interesting because I feel like they're kind of competing for the same voters in a way. Because, when you think about it, you need the support of the working class. That's most Americans. And, Donald Trump, he's appealing to the working class that's working in coal mines and those kinds of places where they feel like they're going to be losing jobs. And for Sanders, that looks different in the sense that, it's the working class who doesn't want billionaires taking all of their money and things along those lines. So I feel like they are kind of appealing to the same people, just with a very different message. So it's just a matter of which one is going to be able to pull them, toward their side. I
feel like it's definitely a numbers game here. They're both kind of trying to appeal to the same type of people, the same kind of income earners. And it's just a matter of who's for who, how many people are actually out there. There's no way to really quantify that. And it's just a matter of time till we see that. I personally think that nobody's going to beat the incumbent. And that's just statistically speaking. But yeah, it's going to be very telling. And also I feel like with our poll in general, it touches just way more of just the national stage of politics. It touches local politics. It touches everything that's kind of happening around our school too. We're going to be asking you, an SDSU student, what do you think of Mission Valley? What do you think of skateboarding even? How do you feel about the current IFC restrictions? So it's something to look forward to.
Yeah, we definitely need engagement. We need involvement. In this similar note, when we're talking about engagement, talking about getting voters out there, my final thought on the poll is you have, 45% of those who are of the age to vote in presidential elections. I think it's about 40% of the country that don't vote, that don't even go to the polls. So, and a lot of those people are young people. So I think that it'll be really interesting to see if that number goes up or goes down in the age of Trump. And not only that, if students are really fired up about this election, because engagement, just participation in the poll is going to show those numbers. But I think we've said all we can about presidential politics at this moment. We're going to know a lot more in the future. We're going to know a lot more when the poll comes out, when we crunch the data, Jack.
We've been talking about this poll for 20 minutes.
We've been on the poll a
we're
long
fired
time.
up, guys. We have a lot of political thoughts bottled up.
Perfect year. We're going to have a lot of stories and a lot of opinion pieces hopefully written. But I feel like now is a perfect time to jump into sports, jump into the Aztecs, a 20-0 start, a big game today, this afternoon at the Thomas and Mack Center in Vegas against the Runnin' Rebels. Here with Kyle Betz, assistant sports editor. We're glad to have you on the show, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Should be an interesting discussion.
You've been covering basketball this year, along with the sports editor, Aaron Tolentino. The Aztecs have had a historic start to the season, tying the program record for a 20-0 start. Today is the day, and when you're hearing this, you'll know the result of the Aztecs versus the Runnin' Rebels. If the Aztecs can make history, start 21-0, we're sitting here in anticipation of that. Kyle, prediction?
I think it's going to be tough for the Aztecs. Right now, it looks like they'll be without Agueka Rope, I'm assuming, because he went down last game. Seemed like he re-aggravated that shoulder issue he had, and Nathan Mensah is most likely out for the season. So the Aztecs have lost arguably their best defender and their starting big man, but Yanni Wetzel has made up for that. He's been putting in work at the 5 position, and he received Mountain West Player of the Week honors a couple weeks ago. Just been playing well in every aspect, offensively, defensively. He's just been very great, grabbing boards, very tenacious rebounder. And I think with the starting lineup behind him, as long as the Aztecs are able to shoot, especially get the ball going from deep early, I think they'll be fine, and they will be 21-0, which will set the record for most wins to start a season.
Well, you mentioned that the Aztecs have a number of key contributors. Agueka Rope, his defense, probably one of the best defenders on the team. Nathan Mensah, a 6'10 forward. You're missing that. Your lineup is a lot smaller if you don't have Nathan Mensah, and unfortunately he's going to be out for the year, and we hope the best for his health. But the Aztecs, Brian Dutcher's team, is one of the deepest in the conference. He regularly uses 10 guys if he can, if everybody's healthy.
Yeah.
He's getting contributions from a number of different players, including Matt Mitchell, who was starting off the bench earlier this year before Nathan went down. That deep bench is going to come in really handy for these tough road games, especially when you have guys, key contributors that are going down, right?
Yeah, you mentioned guys like Matt Mitchell. Everyone talks about how he lost all the weight before the season, how good of shape that he's in right now. But I think it also comes down to the fundamentals. Just the way he's developed over the past 3 seasons, being in that starting lineup, having that experience is huge for this team because they are also led by, obviously, the transfers in the starting lineup, Fagan, Flynn, and Yanni Wetzel. I really think that this team is making waves because of their depth. Having a guy like Trey Pulliam come off the bench and not really be your best shooter, but know how to distribute the ball and take smart shots, I think that's what's most important. And with this team having the depth that it does, I think that one area they need to improve on is with their bigs. I think Joel Mensah, Nolan Narain, I feel like they have a very big responsibility here coming up, especially with tournament season approaching, because they lost Nathan Mensah. Yanni Wetzel can't be playing, Malachi Flynn minutes every night. He just can't do that.
Right.
So relying on those big men, I think, is going to be what's most important, and especially getting offensive rebounds, second chance points.
And you're taking a big risk by having Yanni Wetzel out there for 30-plus minutes, just because of foul trouble in general. If that individual fouls out, if Yanni, a key contributor, gets into foul trouble, right?
Yeah.
You're going to need somebody to take the load of locking down the low post, of being able to draw defenders on the opposite end. Jack, do you have some thoughts on this team, on the Aztecs, their historic start, and what's to come for this basketball team?
Yeah, I've been waiting to kind of circle back to actually this specific UNLV game. I mean, is SDC men's basketball just miles ahead of everybody else in the Mountain West? I mean, UNLV is in second in Mountain West, if I'm not wrong, right? So do they stand a chance? I mean, I personally feel like this is going to be like probably the toughest matchup pretty much almost all season with the amount of
Yeah.
baggage that's coming with this game. They're going to Nevada to go play at the Thomas and Mack Center. Is SDSU really miles ahead, and you're really calling this game that easily?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting how Utah State was ranked to win the conference this season, before the season even started. For the Aztecs, I think it's definitely a winnable game. UNLV right now, I believe they're 6-1 in conference. They're a team that you just can't feel safe around. I think the Aztecs have to establish a lead and hold that lead throughout the game, especially if it's double digits. If they're able to get out to lead that early, I feel like that's most important.
Yeah, I think that spring sports has a lot to say. For the rest of the season, for the rest of the semester, with basketball, I feel like there's questions still to find out, like how strong is this team really? They're approaching they're in the top 3 in most polling across the nation for NCAA teams. It's absolutely unprecedented. I don't think any of us really predicted that they would have been this well in the beginning of the season, given the transfers. But with that, we are approaching almost 3/4 of an hour. So with that, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. But when we come right back, we will discuss what we are looking forward to the most this semester, what is piquing our interest, and then we'll sign right out. And we are back. So with all the news today, we talked about all things frat business, all things presidential polling business, and all things 20-0 for Aztec men's basketball. A lot of promising things that's going to happen this semester, so we'll go in and go around the table, talk about things that we're looking forward to reporting and finding out this semester, and also things that are kind of burning in our mind right now. Kyle, would you like to start?
Yeah, for sure. Since I am the assistant sports editor, I like to stick to sports. For me, I think today we found out that Jack Sears, who is a quarterback from USC who was supposed to transfer to San Diego State, may not be coming here after all. There are reports suggesting that it's because of the lack of hirings that the SDSU football team has had since Brady Hoke became head coach here. So without knowing the current offensive staff, he might be taking a step backwards in transferring to San Diego State. But if he did, I feel like that would be a huge pickup for this team, and especially this offense heading forward. Another thing that I'm thinking about today is if the Aztecs will go 21-0, but in the grand scheme of things, how far will they go? Especially in the Mountain West tournament and the NCAA tournament. A lot of people might think that they can make a push for the Sweet 16 Elite 8. I think the big question is, can they remain healthy enough to do so? And will they be able to get a spark on offense, especially shooting from deep? Because defense is always going to be there, but can they get the ball rolling again?
Yeah. Thank you, Kyle. Next up is Bella Ross, our editor-in-chief.
All right, so not to dwell on the fraternity drama, but that's really been the news this year. It kind of takes over our jobs every year, but I think this year in particular, I think that things kind of came to a breaking point. They've been, festering for a long time, and now we're kind of seeing that play out. So I'm interested to see what the final decision is of the task forces that Adela de la Torre put together, the ones that put out the Good Samaritan policy we were talking about before. They're going to be putting out a final, recommendation to the president in April, I believe, before the end of the semester. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't think that they're going to get rid of Greek life or anything. It doesn't seem like that's an option that's really on the table, especially given the people that we saw that were on the task force. But I think that, it'll be interesting to see because something obviously needs to change, and they've tried to do things to change things in the past, and nothing's ever happened. It's just kind of culminated into this awful tragedy. So, I'm really interested to see where this goes.
All right. Thank you. Assistant news editor, Michael Cline.
I've been reporting on SDSU Mission Valley since before I was assistant news editor. So I'm really, really interested to see how that project finally culminates in shovels in the ground there at the current SDCCU stadium site. This is a big week for SDSU Mission Valley. They have a number of different meetings, first with the City Council, then with the CSU Board of Trustees, to discuss everything from the environmental impact report to the financing plan to the purchase and sale agreement that will finally allow the City of San Diego to transfer the land to San Diego State. There's a ton of stories that have left to be told about Mission Valley, about the sustainability angle, about affordable housing, about the stadium and the future of SDSU athletics, and the education angle, which is often forgotten in a massive construction project like SDSU Mission Valley. So I'm very, very curious to see how the university handles the enormous pressure of a complete satellite campus construction project like SDSU Mission Valley. It's a big task. It's going to take decades and decades, but there's a ton of stories to be told in the next semester. So looking forward to that quite personally.
Yeah, I am excited for pretty much everything we've talked about today in order to find out what's going to happen. About a year ago, I was kind of frustrated. I was like, it seems like SDSU news and reporting on student media was like definitely something of the past, and it was kind of lackluster. Not much was happening now. But I'm kind of eating my words now, and there is a lot to cover, and there are stories wherever you look for them. There is a story in everything. And I feel like with that said, we will move forward onto the next one. So with that said, I am the live show editor. I also like to investigate random things, including scooters. I am more than excited to keep going throughout this semester. But yeah, I am live editor Jack Molmud.
Assistant news editor Michael Cline.
Editor-in-chief Bella Ross.
Assistant sports editor Kyle Betz.
And that has been this episode of Da Pod.